As clear and understandable as possible. I know some of you speak English as a second language, so if anything is not clear, then ask, and I can answer in my terrible German. Okay? So, the subject, both of the lectures today will be dealing with two metaphysical subjects that are very widely misunderstood. In fact, so misunderstood that it's shocking to me that in the general occult and esoteric and New Age community, people believe these two particular things are true that are absolutely not true. So one of my jobs or one of my missions during my stay on this planet is to clarify what is really happening as opposed to what human beings think is happening. To begin with, you have to understand that any mystical or spiritual subject, the knowledge of it has to be based on direct experience, authority. And most of what you read, most of what you hear about mysticism, about altered states of consciousness, about religion, about spirituality, about metaphysics, whatever word you care to use for it, is second-hand information that has been recycled. Somebody wrote a book in 1892, somebody in 1904 copied that book, and then false information about spiritual activity is, sort of trickles down into the public consciousness, but very few people have experience with the actual spiritual world to say, no, that's not true. So a lot of misinformation. This is like a general introduction to both of my talks today. So you have to understand probably most of what you have heard about spiritual matters, about magic, about mysticism, about mythology, about religion is just very superficial, popular knowledge, but it is not rooted in the actual experience. And those of you who are familiar, the mic is out. The mic seems to be not working properly.
Arbeitet nicht richtig?
Yeah, you can hear? Yeah.
Why?
Your voice is also quite.
I can be loud enough without it. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So to resume. So basically, forget what you think you may know about these subjects for the time which we are here. And those of you who are somewhat familiar with my work or career will know that I'm not speaking about this from a theoretical point of view, but that I have been a practicing magician and an initiate for most of my life. Despite my writing, my music, my film work, everything I have done is part of my initiatory teaching, of my magical instruction. So, wait till the door is closed. Okay. So that's by way of general introduction. So the first topic we will address, and I will ask from a show of hands, how many of you have heard the phrase left-hand path? Okay, just about everybody here has known the phrase left-hand path. Now, this is going to be a little bit of audience participation, which is something I know that Germans dread, but we're going to try to gently encourage you to participate. Is anyone courageous enough to volunteer? What do you think the left-hand path means? Let's try to get two just random people. If you've heard this phrase, how would you define it? Any volunteer? I knew I was asking for trouble with the German audience. Okay, here.
Breaking taboos and using violence and sex and all that is not considered holy.
Anyone else? You see how simple that was there? That was painless.
I don't know too much, but I think there was something about finding the true inner will of a person.
Okay. Well, those are actually close. Those are a little closer to something close to reality. Now, if you were to look on the internet and look up the word left-hand path, or linken Pfad in German, you would find it connected mostly with black magic. I think the average person thinks left-hand path means Satanism, black magic, the worship of or involvement with Lucifer, demons, etc. But that is not true. The actual meaning of the left-hand path comes from its only meaning on any scholarly or sensible way comes from the tantric tradition of Hinduism and Buddhism. And I will explain that briefly, and then I will tell you why this has become so misunderstood in the Western world. In India and in the Himalayas, in Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet, and that whole cultural, religious region, the right hand and the right part of the body is identified with masculinity, virtue, the good, basically positive attributes of life. And even in the English language, something is right, it is correct. So rightness in the Indian and in the genuine meaning of Indo-European, Aryan, not in the National Socialist sense, but from India, from the whole tradition of pan-Indian thinking, the right is masculinity, logic, rationality, the linear world, and the left is the feminine. The left represents not only the feminine, but because most of the world religions have a misogynistic streak to them, it is considered that the Roman Latin word sinister, it simply means left, sinistra, or Frank Sinatra's name means left. It's a very common, but we think of everything, we've been taught culturally that everything on the left that is feminine is sinister, is evil, or somehow dirty, suspicious, wrong, where what is masculine on the right is virtuous, good, knightly, moral, etc. So, basically in Orthodox Hinduism, as you may know, as in Christianity, as in Judaism, as in Islam, even though Hinduism worships female goddesses, if you were to go to India, you would find a lot of misogyny about women in general. Women are forbidden from certain professions. I won't get into it in too much detail, but to understand what this gentleman said about taboo breaking, in the Indian Hindu tradition, for instance, the Brahmins, who are the highest caste of the caste system, if a woman's shadow falls on the food of a Brahmin, they have to throw the food out because it's considered and tainted by this sinister, leftwards, chaotic energy of the female. The tantric approach to religion and spirituality, which sees the feminine principle, the divine feminine, as the highest principle, is breaking that taboo. So basically, the left-hand path in India of Hinduism and later in Buddhism, and even in Jainism, which is a third Indian religion that is somewhat lesser known, there's a tantric approach which venerates the feminine and sees the feminine as the highest and most holy and sacred manifestation in the material world. And I can't get into every reason why that is, but on a basic logical level, everything, all of us, the only reason we exist is because of the feminine. We all came out of a mother. Everything in this physical, sentient world that exists, when we think of the miracle that woman is the portal to being, and how powerful that is. Without woman, we don't exist. There is no creation. So if we go outside of the male-focused religions, which concentrate on a one male creator God, and I will address that too, the problems with the Abrahamic religion and its hatred of women, really, in the Old Testament, the New Testament, and in the Quran. They are basically religions about how evil women are, how Eve fucked up everything by eating this apple, and God had to rape a human woman later and have a son that he killed to make up for the evil woman eating the apple. By my standards, that's not a very logical application of religious belief. But, so the left-hand path in India, I'm not going to describe it in great detail, but the important thing to understand is it doesn't have any meaning outside of this Eastern Hindu and Buddhist context. And one thing I want to point out, it's literally, now this is a very controversial part of Tantric Hinduism and Buddhism. The left-hand path, as opposed to other religious systems, takes all of human experience into account. Most religions say, you know, the material world is evil and horrible, women are tempting and they're seducing poor innocent men into temptation and sin. The left and the right-hand path of Hinduism, Buddhism is more abstract and not as concerned with the physical world. One of the key landmarks of the left-hand path, and the phrase in Tantric Buddhism, which I am a practitioner and teacher of, is to take everything in life on the path. So for instance, this moment, now obviously I'm teaching you something, but every single moment of our life, if our mind is aware, is teaching us, is awakening us. It's not like we have to go to some special sacred place. And in Tantricism, the body itself is called the temple of the 9 gates. So your physical body is the temple from which you can attain the highest mystical level of consciousness, which I won't get into the detailed explanation of that. But rather than rejecting the physical world, Tantricism, or the left-hand path in general, sees the physical world as the means to enlightenment, as the means to liberation, not something to be deplored or condemned or hated. And a secondary part of that now some people in the West hear that and they justify it to think that that means that you can just be sheerly a hedonist and just be concerned with physical pleasure. And there are a lot of people that misuse the word Tantra for that reason, to just basically be a hedonist that has no spiritual value. There was a question here? Oh, okay. All right, so the left-hand path, in essence, is a Eastern system of venerating the female. It's very much concerned with what is, I'm sure some of you have heard the word Shakti. And Shakti means the power in Sanskrit, but it also means female. And it means the female power. For instance, Kali is the highest emanation of Shakti force. And Kali has been a very important goddess in my own initiation, has directly led me to where I am. And I want to be clear, I'm coming from the point of view that Kali and these goddesses are actual existent beings. They are higher beings. They're not just archetypes They're not just Jungian concepts. They are actual beings, just like you are. They have as much reality or as little as you do. So that's a very important part of the left-hand path, is that unlike in standard occultism or modern witchcraft or the esoteric world in general, where gods and goddesses are seen as symbols that mankind can order around and play with, on the contrary, a metaphor that I have used as far as the differentiation between the mortal world and the divine realm, there are 6 realms of being in this cosmos. There are the hell realms, which are the demonic lower realms. There are the hungry ghost realms, which includes ghosts, people who don't realize they're dead and are still here. I'm sure some of you have surely encountered ghosts. Then there's the animal level of being, which we share this realm of consciousness that we are in now. And I want to point out, this realm of consciousness that we're in now is just a state of consciousness. This that we are experiencing is not ultimate reality. This is like a dream. It is a very believable and credible hallucination that we have been experiencing since we were born. And the point of mystical and initiatory practice ultimately is to awaken from this dreamlike illusion. So the gods, by contacting them, by working with them, they can help us to awaken their state. But the metaphor I was referring to, we share this mortal realm with the animal realm. How many of you have a cat or a dog at home? Quite a few of you. So think of your cat is hungry, and your cat goes meow, and somehow magically this being gets it food and brings food to it because it says the magical spell meow. But the cat has no idea that you went to Rive or Edeka or Aldi or what those are, and that you got cat food and you brought it to them, and you, as far as they know, you are a divine being. And they say this mantra, meow, and somehow you figure out you need to give them food. That is how much the normal human being understands of the divine realm. They are infinitely superior to us, although we share something of the godlike essence. But we are between the animal realm and the divine realm. We're right in the middle between them. We are half animal, half God. And most of us, if we do not practice any spiritual discipline, will sink back into the animal realm. And I'm sure you have noticed most people are really not very much higher than the animal realm. So the point of this kind of initiation is to rise to the divine realm and then to states above that, which I can't get into today in our brief summary. So the next thing I want to explain then, part 2 of this talk, is how did the left-hand path become so misunderstood? One thing I want to point out about etymology and magic, the word in Sanskrit, left-hand path is Vama Marga, which means the path of the left. But in Sanskrit, words have many different layers of meaning, and Vama means left and female. And if you think of the word in English, feminine, in French, la femme, that comes from Sanskrit Vama. So the Sanskrit that came into the Indo-European languages. So basically the left-hand path can be called the way of woman, Vama Marga, the path of the female. So many different invaders came into the Indian realm. First of all, Well, actually, within India, the Orthodox Hindus hated this veneration of women, which is called Shaktiism, which is looking at the feminine principle of Shakti as the highest divine principle and trying to awaken that within us through yogic and tantric practices, which include sexual yoga, which is one of the more controversial and misunderstood areas of left-hand path practice. So even the Orthodox Hindus and Brahmins looked at the left-hand path as some kind of evil witchcraft because the veneration of women is seen as intrinsically evil. And if we look at the English word veneration, it comes from a word for worshiping Venus. V-E-N is the root word. So to venerate was to worship the goddess of love, Venus. So even in Western religion and in ancient Hellenic Grecian religion, there's an aspect of the left-hand path, this worship of the goddess. So when the Muslims invaded India and found this left-hand path tantric practice and statues of goddesses that people worshipped, and even the left-hand path tantric morality says that a woman cannot be beaten. And the Muslims that invaded India found that outrageous because the Quran and Islam recommends that women should be beaten and kept in a subservient role. So when the Muslims conquered India, they pretty much destroyed the left-hand path tantric practices there, although they survived and they still are there today. They systematically wiped it out. When the British colonized India and brought their Christian Victorian or pre-Victorian values, they were horrified by the sexual practices, by the tantric practices, again, by the worship of the female coming from the male-dominated Christian religion, which is all about Yahweh, Jehovah, Allah. So they destroyed what the Muslims had not destroyed at the left-hand path. The British destroyed it from their Christian morality. So Islam wiped it out. Then the Chinese communists, when they invaded Tibet, which really in Tibet is where the Indian Tantra of Buddhism survived because the British and the Muslims had wiped it out in India, the Chinese communists were appalled by the left-hand path aspects and of course, committed genocide and basically destroyed the Tibetan Buddhist religion, forcing it into exile. Now, from that, in the 19th century, how many of you are familiar with the Theosophist founder, Madame Blavatsky? How many of you heard that name? So, if you look in the occult Western esoteric world, many people think of Madame Blavatsky as this great genius who understood everything about Eastern mysticism. In fact, she was basically a con woman who used spiritual wrapping paper. She was like a phony medium who found a gimmick. And like L. Ron Hubbard with Scientology, Theosophy was a mishmash of esoteric concepts, so almost all of them totally wrong. And she is single-handedly responsible for, in her early writings, saying that the left-hand path is the way of black magic, of evil, of deliberate malevolence and malignance, which is strange. Here is a woman who is generally looked on as a strong female spiritual leader, which is a rare thing, but she condemned the left-hand path. And it is from her, and if you can trace my pedantic path of how did this phrase become so misunderstood. So Madame Blavatsky's Theosophy had a huge influence on the 19th century magical and mystical revival. The Order of the Golden Dawn which was a British magical group, which is also very widely revered, adopted her idea of the left-hand path. And they also taught their students, many of them very influential, that the left-hand path is evil, selfishness, black magic. The right-hand path is good, virtuous, white magic. One of the most troublesome applicants to the Order of the Golden Dawn was Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, again, is a revered sacred cow, and I know among some of you here, but we're going to have to agree to disagree on him. He also didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. When it came, his understanding of Egyptology was wrong. And his smattering of understanding of Eastern mysticism was wrong. And he too, and he probably is primarily, even though he stole these ideas from the Golden Dawn and Blavatsky, he's primarily responsible for the occult belief that the left-hand path is sinister, evil, black magic, the devil. So Crowley really spread that idea, and his popularity since the 1960s as the expert on all things magical, which I absolutely do not believe he is, then inspired people even worse than him. One of them being my ex-father-in-law, Anton LaVey, who in his early writings, based on his basic ignorance of religion, of spirituality, of genuine metaphysical practice, basically took Crowley and Blavatsky's saying, look how evil the left-hand path is, and he, in a kind of juvenile adolescent rebellion, said then the left-hand path is good. And that has led probably to the most confusion in this Gothic satanic subculture, because that's, so you see how old these ideas are. What I was saying in the beginning, there's some disinformation in the 19th century, and then it just keeps being repeated and repeated. So basically, to sum it up, Blavatsky and Crowley and the Golden Dawn and Islam and the British say the left-hand path is evil, and then modern Satanism has said, well, if you think it's evil, we think it's great, and therefore we will say we're practicing it. But they don't know what it is. It is a complex system of mystical initiation and yoga, which only has context and meaning within the Indian subtext of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. A final thing about the actual practice of the left-hand path is, along with the veneration of the female and seeing the feminine divine principle as the highest expression of the sacred, literally in the sexual yoga of the left-hand path, in the ritual that is performed, the woman sits on the left because this transhuman feminine power is literally on the left. So when a couple performs a tantric sexual union, the female is placed on the left, and that's another reason why it means left-hand path. Other satanic groups since the Church of Satan, which there are many, the Temple of Set, there have been hundreds since then. Now, since the age of the internet, anyone that has a Facebook page is a satanic high priest with their own order. All of them basically recycle the same wrong ideas. And now generally people talk about the left-hand path community. It's completely wrong. It's just utterly wrong. So, in conclusion, if you leave with nothing else from this, the next time you hear someone refer to the left-hand path as meaning black magic, Satanism, evil, selfishness, or even the way of individualism, maybe they make it a bit nicer, like it's a way to be more individualistic, which really means exalting the ego. That's not true. It's literally not true. And if you look into the scholarly an actual meaning of the left-hand path. The most important thing, it means the worship of the feminine principle within your body, without your body, and to see the goddess as the highest expression of divinity. So I hope that has clarified some things, and if you have 2 or 3 questions, I'm happy to answer them before we take a pause. Any questions? Okay, then you understand it all. There's a...
So if I understand that correctly,
So you are practicing something that's closer to the original meaning, I think.
Yes.
And maybe you want to say 1 or 2 sentences about what that could mean, like in modern day Western world.
She was saying that yes, I practice the traditional form. Briefly, without getting into the whole biography, in England in the early 1980s, I got involved with a guru in India who was in the tantric left-hand path of the Vedic or Hindu system and was initiated into the cult of Kali. And in London at that time there was and still is, a very large Indian community, and so I took a vow to the goddess Kali. And that is essentially what is known as Shaktism in Hinduism. It's very complicated, so basically it is you use mantras, ritual, you try to your mind melds with the mind of the goddess Kali. And as crazy as it will seem to logical, rational, materialistic people, she has appeared to me. She has appeared to me as she has to many people over the world. And the strange thing is, although she is a Hindu goddess, in the beginning of the 21st century, she appeared to me and told me to convert to Tantric Buddhism, which is not actually her religion. And that's a whole complicated story too, which I did. I followed her instruction, and it has turned out to be the wisest thing I ever did, probably. So the point there is, this isn't just abstract and theoretical. If you do these practices, these various goddesses will appear to you, will guide you. And the final thing I'll say about that, the female in Tantric Buddhism is associated with the concept of wisdom, which is inner knowledge, ultimate knowledge, not learned scholarly knowledge, but genuine Weisheit. And that's what the feminine stands for in Tantric Buddhism. So, thank you for your attention. Okay, we will take a break. If you're interested, you can purchase the Manson file and some of my music, and I will be happy to autograph and sign anything you wish. We'll take a break, and then we will continue to talk about another controversial and even possibly more totally misunderstood subject. So thank you.
Just talk about a small break, like 10 minutes, or next one.